Welcome to ZKast, everyone. I'm ZS Caraval from ZK Research, and I'm joined today by Derek Peabody, who is the Product Management Director of Business Solutions of Verizon. Derek, why don't you say hello to everybody and just introduce yourself and a quick bio on yourself?
Sure thing. Hey, thanks once again for having me. Derek Peabody here, as Zayu said, and I'm a product management director in our Verizon business group. I largely have our mobile unified communication services, as well as sort of our over-the-top services that attach to our core mobility offers.
Yeah, and I'm excited to have you today because we're going to talk Teams and we're going to talk hybrid work and all things related to that. And it's a great topic because obviously Teams has seen an explosion of adoption, right? I think the last number they reported 320 million users, which is phenomenal when you think of just where they were a few years ago. Much of that, though, has been driven by just this rise of remote work in the pandemic and then hybrid work today. In fact, my research shows that 75% of workers will continue to be remote at least one day a week. And I'm curious, Derek, from the customers you talk to, why are you seeing such strong growth in Microsoft Teams?
I think you hit two of them for sure. Is just the whole first the pandemic and everybody having to go remote really quickly without a lot of time to plan for it. And then it sort of became a way to settle into our hybrid work routine. But I think there's another important thing here is we continuously hear from customers that they've got too many tools to use, and it's really frustrating their end users and starting to impact their productivity. So I think by bringing some of the calling, meetings, messaging solutions into the fold of some of the core productivity functions of Office 365, what Microsoft has done with Teams is really started to knock down some of those traditional silos of I'm going to use this app for that, this app for something else, and on and on. And I think customers are reacting to that, both from a cost savings perspective and from honestly a simplicity perspective as well.
Yeah, and I think, and although Teams is a very broadly adopted tool, it does have a number of limitations that hinder its usability, particularly for remote and mobile workers. Teams, I think, is a great tool for workers who are tied to a desk, but doesn't deliver quite the same experience for mobile workers that are constantly on the go. And I think one of the most significant issues is that just making a simple Teams call on a mobile device can be challenging. And so Microsoft, to their benefit, I think, has relied heavily on partners like yourself to become a complete UC solution. And so one of the areas that it does partner with quite heavily is for Teams calling. And I'll mention that. And one of the things I want to mention is that Verizon was the first with a fairly unique offering where Teams is integrated with the mobile network. And you call that Verizon Mobile for Microsoft Teams. So talk about what that is.
Yeah, we do call it Verizon Mobile for Microsoft Teams, as you said. Just to level set everybody, Microsoft refers to it as Teams Phone Mobile. But what we've fundamentally done, Zayu said, and everyone, is we've integrated our smartphone mobile core into the Teams platform so that now your smartphone becomes a Teams endpoint, and it does that in a native manner. And when I say native, what I really mean is you don't need to use the Teams app. Of course you can, but you can use your smartphone to place and receive calls like you always have, whether you're calling your grandma, calling to order pizza. You just use the phone natively, but you have that full Teams experience and Teams feature functionality extended out to that smartphone. So what we've effectively done is turned a smartphone natively into a full UC solution. And it's really helping Zeus, as you said, those people that are out in the field, they may not have the ability to use an app for low data coverage reasons, et cetera. But now they'll have the reliability of voice in a native experience, and then that simple experience that they're used to, that they do, unfortunately, fortunately, we're all on our smartphones all the time, but it's just the way that they've always used their smartphone. But again, with that full power of Teams extended out to that device.
Actually, one of the things you mentioned that I want to make sure people fully understand is that, okay, so while I might have my mobile phone here and I can flip on the client and call from it, that's using the data channel, right? With what you're doing, and just reiterate that you're actually using the voice channel, correct?
Yeah, and a lot of people may not know this unless you're deep into the industry, but I
Yeah.
think all mobile operators like Verizon have got two portions of their mobile network, and you alluded to it. There's the data portion where all apps run. That data portion, anything that you're doing from an application perspective will run over the data channels of our network. But voice has its own dedicated portion of the network. And that was done a long time ago, largely to make sure that you've got that high quality service that you expect. And Zeus and really everybody, voice is pretty fragile. And I know this from my own experience with other products that I manage that use apps for voice, and getting voice to run consistently in a quality experience over an application on a mobile provider's data network can sometimes be challenging. And to your point, I think Microsoft recognized that and partnered up with people like Verizon to be able to use that native high quality voice portion of the network to deliver what their end users are expecting.
Yeah, and so again, just let's talk about the benefit from a user experience perspective, right? If I use the Teams app, I could have contention with other apps that might degrade the voice channel. We're always in certain spots where I see my data go from 5G to LTE, sometimes even down to 3G. That would impact the data channel as well, correct? But with if I'm using the voice channel, I would expect my experience to be consistent regardless of where I am.
Yeah, absolutely, Zeus. You got it exactly right. And I actually had one customer, I think you and I have talked about this before, but this customer had people out in the field that were literally down in trenches. They were digging trenches, putting, I think, maybe fiber optic cable into those trenches. And to your point, they had no data coverage in those trenches, but they did have voice coverage. So by moving from app-based calling to the Verizon Mobile for Microsoft Teams solution, they were finally able to receive voice calls literally while they were, down in a trench.
That's great. And so there's a user experience benefit. There's just a quality of service benefit. What are some of the other benefits customers can realize here?
We're seeing, I would say, three main things. We touched on one of end user experience. The other one that's really rising, I think, to the top, especially in the economic environment we're in, is cost savings. A lot of customers, especially larger customers, are often paying for two phone services for their employees. They may have a legacy wireline fixed service, and then they're also providing a smartphone service, especially, again, coming back to those remote or field workers. And candidly, from when we do a little show of hands, who's got their desk phone forwarded to their mobile number? Usually, most of the people raise their hands because they're out in the field, they're using their smartphone. That is sort of their identity for all intents and purposes. It's who their customers know to call, it's who they expect calls from. And this, again, allows them to eliminate those redundant sort of voice connections and make sure they're meeting their end user really where and how they work. And it's driving some tremendous cost savings from some of our customers that have adopted this. I think one was up to $5 million a year, again, just by making sure they're only providing the calling service to the end user that they need and not an extra one that they maybe don't need. So they're retiring legacy services, legacy PBXs, and all that goes along with that.
Yeah, and from an IT perspective, though, isn't there a control benefit as well where now the user doesn't have to give out the personal number, right? And I used to be a former IT pro, and I know when we had people leave, it was always a race to see who could contact the customers first, right? The person who left or our company. But in this case, the integration is directly with the mobile network. So when the person's programming the Teams calling, it's directly on the phone, right? There's no overlays, and it obviates the need for a user to give out their personal number, I assume.
Yeah, I would put that into two categories once again, Zeus. Sort of the identity, like you talked about, the business now owns that phone number and the identity. If the employee leaves, they have control over the number. They can either shut it down or move it to another employee to make sure that they don't lose any calls. So that's certainly one of the aspects of why this is helping. And then I think the other one in terms of call control, right? So now you can set policies within Teams that are applicable to that smartphone when it's used natively. And that's something that really nobody's been able to do in the past. Whether it's what you do, as you mentioned, Zeus, for outbound caller ID presentation, Teams has functionality that allows you to replace the end user subscriber's phone number with, let's say, your toll-free number, or even calling policies, calls that are allowed, not allowed. All of that can now be, again, using the power of Teams extended out to that smartphone when it's used natively without an application.
Yeah, and so that brings up an interesting compliance standpoint as well for regulated industries. This seems like a lot better approach than what we have today, which is really the Wild West. I know when I was an IT pro in financial services, we had a very, very difficult time trying to police some of that stuff. So,
yeah, some of our very first early adopters last year were exactly that, Zeus. They were compliance because traditionally, at least to my knowledge, there's been no, and you alluded to this, there's no easy way to record smartphone native voice calls. And for anybody that has that need from a compliance perspective, this is the first time I think the industry has solved that. You could always do it with apps, like you said. It was kind of sort of a kludgy approach. And there was always the risk, right, from a compliance perspective, that you would come back and just by mistake use your native smartphone, right? And now you've placed an unrecorded call that's out of compliance.
Yeah, and you gave a couple of other examples, a couple of customers example already. Do you have any others you can share and some of the other benefits, whether it's qualitative or quantitative?
We've hit, I think, some of the big ones. I talked about the cost savings. That does seem to be a huge motivator right now. End user simplification for sure. And then Zeus and everybody, again, we really just hit on that compliance and that compliance ability. And it's not just voice compliance, but also messaging compliance. Now, today, we do not have our SMS and MMS integrated to Teams. That's a roadmap item for both Microsoft and Verizon for this year. But from a voice compliance perspective, we just discussed how VMMT and Teams enables that. And then Verizon also does SMS and MMS compliance, network-based compliance with some other partners. But again, we'll be able to put that all through Teams and use Teams compliance, not just for the voice, but for the messaging as well.
Well, compliance people like control. So if you're giving them more control, that's certainly a benefit there.
Absolutely.
Now, I mean, this isn't the only Teams service that Verizon offers. So can you talk about what those are and then how this relates to them? Because a lot of Teams customers do get confused at the myriad of options out there and when they should use which.
Yeah, and it's a great question. And I think one of the things that we've learned is knowing which end user needs which service becomes very critical to your point. But we do enable calling in 3 different ways for Microsoft Teams. As we've talked about here, the mobile, VMMT, or Teams Phone Mobile. We also have what Microsoft refers to as Operator Connect. Verizon calls that Verizon VoIP for Microsoft Teams. That does use our global IP trunking or VoIP service to enable calling, and again, using the Operator Connect functionality of Microsoft Teams. And then last, but certainly not least, is Verizon calling for Microsoft Teams, or in Microsoft's terminology, direct routing. That's available in over 150 countries, and that provides a little bit more flexibility in using dedicated session border controllers for customer deployment. You can integrate other things into those session border controllers, whether it's contact center, et cetera. Makes it a little bit more complex than the other 2 flavors, but we're seeing a lot of traction with that as customers do global deployments in a more standardized manner, using that solution all around their offices throughout the world.
And do you view those as competitive with one another, or are they really complementary? And customers might, depend on the organization, one definitely is the best choice.
It's a great question. I think they're very complementary to each other. I've had the privilege of speaking to about 100 enterprise or government customers in the last year. And out of all of those customers, maybe 2 were ready to go all in mobile or all in fixed, right? But everybody, Zeus, to your point, has a need for both of those services because their employees are either frontline mobile workers or perhaps more fixed knowledge-based workers. And again, being able to meet them with the calling service they need has been really critical, not just from a Verizon perspective, but from our customers' perspective. So absolutely mixing and matching. Usually it's a little of VMMT, the mobile flavor, and one of either direct routing or Operator Connect. or it's usually not all three. We've had a few of those, but usually it's the mobile flavor and one of the more fixed flavors the customers are using.
Yeah, that's great. I suppose choice is always the optimal thing for customers. So that's fantastic. Now, I do want to ask about roadmap as much as you can share. You did talk a little about messaging. What else can customers expect here with respect to Teams and Verizon?
I think messaging will be the next big integration, like we both have just said. Again, just getting everything to a single source, everything funneled through Teams. Nothing that's imminent, but I think you're starting to see a lot of noise in the industry about Gen AI and the voice stream or voice traffic, and not just from the traditional, I've recorded something, I'm going to throw Gen AI at it to figure out, what's the sentiment of my recordings, are there trends, etc. A lot of people are doing that. But actually having Gen AI in the call flow, I think is something that you'll start to see. So whether it's a virtual assistant, somebody that's taking notes for you, sort of like you can do in a lot of the meeting applications like we're using now, scheduling things for you, summarizing calls. I think that's probably the next sort of brave frontier in voice with Teams, with Verizon, and you'll just see a lot of that, I think. There's a lot of really, I think, powerful use cases, fraud, translation, etc. No, sorry to interrupt you.
No, I was going to say what's interesting about that is voice has largely been kind of a dark channel for companies to do analytics on forever, right? I mean, you think about how long we've had voice, but no one's really ever been able to do any kind of analytics on voice. So the potential that Gen AI brings to actually uncap all the knowledge stored in voice is pretty interesting. And one last question here. One of the things that comes up all the time as an analyst, and I hear this from some analysts that I think it's not just analysts, the media writes about this a lot, is that voice is dead, right? Everyone talks about voice going away, but from what my research, it looks like it's never been stronger. And I'm curious, when you guys look at your roadmap, are you seeing that? Is voice a dying channel, or is it the opposite?
No, like you, Zaves, I don't think voice is going away in anytime in the near future, right? I've been in the voice business most of my career. I won't admit to how long that has been. I've certainly seen voice evolve, right? But it just evolves. But people still want that voice to voice, that human connection, right? There are certainly instances where people don't want to call, don't want to have a conversation, and there are tools and things for that. But when somebody goes through the effort, I think, of picking up the phone, they probably want to talk to another human being, right? It's that we've been doing it for, however long we've been talking to each other, thousands and thousands of years. And I think that's just part of who we are and part of how people like to talk. So long way of saying, I don't see voice going away anytime in the near future. I do see it being augmented by Gen AI. Again, probably the next evolution of voice as we've gone from plain old telephone service to PRI to PBXs, cloud PBXs, voice over IP, mobile, and now I think here we are with mobile UC and likely Gen AI sort of powering that service too.
Yeah, I'm glad you went through that evolution, because that breaks down the other myth around voice, is that there's been very little innovation, right? So you think in just the last 20 years, there's been probably more innovation in voice than we saw in the previous 200 years that we've had it. So, and I'll leave the audience with one anecdote. I was talking with one of the mobile payment companies that didn't actually have voice in their contact center at all, and because they were targeting a younger audience. And what he realized was that when people want to talk about money, right, or anything that stresses them out, they want to talk to a person, right? It's not a bot. They don't want to text. They want to talk to somebody. And so I think you're right. When you look at all the interactions we have in the world, it's being augmented digitally, but voice is still alive and kicking. So, all right, Derek, anything else you want to share?
No, I just want to thank you again. Really exciting things happening in the industry, I think. I know we're here to talk about Teams, and they've done really well. And like I said, I think the next evolution we'll all see is sort of leveling Gen AI against that. What can we do with voice, and defining those use cases sort of as the next evolution. But again,
all right, if you're interested in Microsoft Teams, I'll make sure the link is included below in the YouTube description. So on behalf of Derek Peabody and Matthias Caravello from ZK Research, and thanks for watching. Pleasure having you on, Derek. And please hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time on another ZKast.